Welcome to Work Life Leader Live. I am Julie Cohen, CEO of Work Life Leader, which is a leadership development, executive coaching, and training organization. Thank you for joining me today on this platform. Work Life Leader Live is a conversation with interesting people where we talk about leadership, career effectiveness, career management, the world of work, the intersection between work and life, and satisfaction and effectiveness. And this is one of my favorite things I get to do professionally. And I'm excited you're here with me. So with that, for today's topic and guest, I want to introduce you to Joe Baker. So welcome, Joe. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Julie.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And Joe and I were just chatting a little before we went live, and Joe is in Arizona. In the sunlight is shining there, and I'm from the East Coast, so we have about about a foot of snow on the ground here. So how are things in your in your neck of the woods?
Well, since our topic today is on virtual leadership, it's only appropriate that I'm virtual and not working from my normal office in Chicago, where we have a foot and a half of snow. Arizona is lovely right now, in the mid 70s. So I'm soaking in the sun and enjoying it.
Wow. Well, good. Well, we in the East Coast and those in the Midwest still, we will live vicariously through you. So, Joe, it's great you're here. So as Joe mentioned, our topic for today, what we're going to be talking about is leading virtually and best practices. This obviously is a critically important topic at all times, but in the last year, it has become even more relevant as our world of work has turned upside down, and pretty much everyone, if not most people, are having to lead and work virtually, most likely in a way that they haven't had to before. But before we get to the topic, Joe, I want to introduce you formally, and I'm going to read this because I want to make sure your full background is shared with everyone who has tuned in with us today. So Joe Baker is a partner at People Results, which is a human capital consultancy that helps organizations develop expertise and deliver change. Joe helps leaders and teams improve executive presence, influence with positive impact, navigate organizational politics, and communicate and collaborate well in challenging situations. He is a master's certified coach with the International Coach Federation and is adjunct faculty and an executive coach for the Center for Creative Leadership and for Coach Source. And it's my honor that Joe is also a coach for Work Life Leader, where he has touched the lives of many of our clients. So it is an honor and pleasure to talk with you, Joe, and thanks for taking time to be here with this discussion.
My pleasure, Julie. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, so I want to welcome anyone who is watching. So today is Friday, February 12th, 2021, and it is a little afternoon on the East Coast of the U.S. So if you are here live watching, please put in the chat box, hello, let us know you're here, where you're watching from, because to make this as a most engaging and interesting topic, which it will be, but to make it even more interesting and engaging, we're going to be asking for your input, your feedback, asking us questions, answering questions. The more involved our viewers are, the better it is. So I hope, looking forward to hearing from you. So again, please put your hello in the chat box and use hashtag live if this is real time. So we always like to start these conversations, or I always like to start these with an icebreaker. And the icebreaker for today, Joe, is want to understand what challenges have you had working and leading virtually over the last year. Anything come up for you?
Yeah, definitely. I worked virtually a good amount already, but I would say once we started working from home almost a year ago now, I suddenly started having many more video calls. So just from a practical matter, and along with everybody else who made that transition, I was dealing with the tech challenges with way more video calls. And my wife also works from home a good amount of the time. We have a couple of college-age sons that were home working, studying. So we had to share all the bandwidth, and I think I was probably in a better setup than most of my clients and most others and my colleagues. So somebody inevitably was having some kind of tech challenges. So working around that was initially a challenge. I would say then that shifted into the bigger challenge became, okay, we're kind of in a new mode here, a new MO. On the positive side, I wasn't traveling as much and maybe had some more flexibility and more efficiency because of that. But you can easily fill in all that time with work and getting stuff done. And so I think that on top of everything else going on, pandemic, social, political unrest, there was just an extra layer of anxiety and tension that my clients were dealing with, that I was helping them with, and I realized also that I was dealing with. So I think another challenge has been just keeping my tank full and adjusting to a new mode, new approach. I know you do a lot of work with helping people balance their life and their work and everything going on, Julie, and I my clients are dealing with that also, and we all do individually. So adjusting for how I'm going to keep my tank full and stay at my best through this unusual stretch of time has also been a challenge.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to share a challenge that I encountered and learned a lot from. But before I do, I want to reintroduce our topic. And I'm speaking with Joe Baker, who's an executive coach and is a partner at People Results. And we're talking about leading virtually, and we're going to be talking about best practices. But right now we're sharing, Joe just shared a challenge that he encountered, over the last year with, moving to this virtual environment. Before I share mine, if you're watching, I'd love to share with us a challenge that you've had, either leading virtually in your role as a leader and kind of moving to a virtual environment, or if you're in an organization, what you've seen, some of your employees, some of your talent struggle with. If you're a coach and you're watching this, again, what you've seen your clients struggle with or what you've struggled with. So please share in the chat box any challenges that you've encountered over the last year or ever about leading virtually. And we'd love to talk about that. So one of the things that and there's multiple, but this one was fairly eye-opening. So, and Joe, you know me, I am highly extroverted. I love connecting with folks, and I don't care what environment that is, whether it's virtual, in person, phone, text. Similar to you, my work was always significantly virtual. So 80% or so was always virtual. I traveled, would do in-person work, which I always enjoyed, but I'm used to this format. Mm-hmm. So with the transition, again, it wasn't that challenging, but I very much enjoy Zoom conversations. And so since all of a sudden Zoom became more readily common for just about everyone, I was scheduling lots and lots of Zooms. And what I found is everyone doesn't like it as much as I do. And so where I would be saying to people, okay, so here, I'm going to send you a Zoom link. I didn't realize not everyone was comfortable on Zoom the way I was. Now, logically, when I think about it, I realize, of course, that makes sense. But now I've taken to not assuming just because I want to have a Zoom session that they will want that. So now I ask permission, or I actually ask preferences. Hey, how would you prefer to engage this conversation? And what I'm finding is it's about 50-50. A lot of people are deferring to, quote unquote, old fashioned phone. And so I needed to realize that my style and comfort on this tool was not everyone else's. So, which which obviously, as we know, is a really critical leadership competency, understanding other people's preferences as opposed to our own. So that was a big aha. So, all right. So with that, again, if you have challenges that you have been facing or struggling with as you've been leading, using your leadership skills, building leadership skills virtually, we'd love to hear them. Please put them in any of your chat box, whatever platform you're watching us on, and we'll bring those into our discussion. But with that, Joe, let's talk about that. The big question: why are we talking about virtual leadership here?
Well, I like the way you set it up in the beginning, Julie. Leadership is always a relevant and important topic, and it's worth us focusing on because we can always do better. But I think leading virtually has some nuanced challenges. So some skills require a little bit different practical action, different behaviors, different mindsets. So it's, and that said, not all of us are necessarily super intentional about leadership, let alone making some adjustments as we lead more virtually. So I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I know you have too. I even led a few sessions, workshops last fall. So again, I think it's a really timely topic for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting, it's funny. I was just talking to a COO this morning of an organization that I've done some work with, and for the first couple months post pandemic, we were referencing what was going on as the new world of work. Kind of this we've had to, and the conversation would go, okay, well, when we get back to normal,
right?
It ain't happening. It's kind of what I said to him, and so I think no longer can we assume that there's going to be a return, whatever. And there may never be a normal. And I think this is what we need to remember, that agility is going to be really critical in how we lead. And whether it's technological agility or interpersonal agility, communication agility, and self-care agility, all important components of leadership. So, we know this is important, and it's going to be consistently kind of changing as we go. So, go ahead.
And Julie, just to build on what you said, agility just I think is key. And I came across a really interesting study last fall that SurveyMonkey did, with very recent data, where they looked at the organizations that seemed to be faring the best through this transition of having to work from home and navigating the pandemic environment. And there were two traits, leadership traits, but just traits in general that stood out at where if people in those organizations demonstrating these traits, they did better. And agility was number one, along with curiosity.
Oh, curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity and agility. And they define these pretty practically, but agility, like you said, it's about being willing to flex, adjust, do something different, change on the fly as needed. And curiosity is about proactively learning and seeing what might work. And they go hand in hand, because if you're curious, but you're also agile, you're actually willing to make some changes. But you may not think about the changes unless you get curious. So anyway, I think that was, and maybe this is a good segue too, Julie. Do you mind if we show the slide that I sent? One key part of leading is obviously leading teams. And I came across some other really interesting research about team effectiveness last fall. Wiley Publishers, John Wiley and Sons, has a division that focuses on workplace learning. And they have the DISC assessment. They have 5 behaviors of a cohesive team you may have heard of, and several other assessments. Julie, I know you and I work with the DISC and the Work Life Leader program. But anyway, they did some research that ended right around the time the pandemic started. And so the last part of the research kind of reflected the beginning of the pandemic, but a lot of this was prior. And interestingly, when interviewed, people said that they thought they were effective team members 99% of the time. 99% of people say, yeah, I'm a great team member. But when you ask their team members, their teammates, they disagree about that stat. And you can also do the same kind of polling to say, ask managers if they're great managers, and they say, yes, I am. But you ask the people that work for them, and they say, no, they're not, more often than not. So interestingly, drilling down a little bit, teammates said, basically, most of the time, there is a problem with trust. They lack the ability to give each other constructive feedback. They don't hold each other accountable. And you can see the specific stats on this slide.
Yeah.
And they aren't clearly committed when they leave meetings, for example. And meetings is a huge aspect of effective teaming. So, this was the case already going into this sudden emphasis on working from home that so many organizations had to migrate to. So it's even harder to really have an effective team dynamic and productivity as a team when you're working virtually.
Yeah. So interesting. So there's so many interesting things you said in just in that one segment that we could go different tangents. So there's two things I want to acknowledge. First, the gap, the self-awareness gap. 99%. I'm effective, 61%, and more data. Lots of significant data that does not match up with that self-awareness. So,
right.
If we look at leadership holistically, obviously one of the important tools of not only effective leaders but effective professionals, regardless of your role, is self-awareness, understanding how you impact others around you. And then yet self-awareness alone is not enough. So self-awareness and then the ability to do something with that self-awareness is to me the magic. And that's kind of the work that you and I do as coaches who focus on this. So what we're going to do now is kind of drill down into these areas that Joe just highlighted. Trust, constructive feedback, accountability, clear commitments. Again, we could probably spend an hour on each of these at least. But before we go to one of these, Joe, which I'm going to ask you where you want to go first. We just got a comment from someone who's watching, kind of building on what we spoke about previously. Mike Ford just said, nimble organizations are thriving. And so Mike, thank you for sharing that. I'd love to, if you have any examples, if that's your organization or other organizations that you're working with or have read about, give us some examples of how you see that nimble, the ability for nimbleness and adaptability and agility, how it actually plays out. So I would love to hear some examples of whether it's individuals or organizations and how they're managing. So let's go back to the slide, Joe. So when you see all these, where do you want to start?
Well, how about trust? I don't know about you, Julie, but I've seen a transition initially when the pandemic came on and people were sent home. And so all of a sudden there's some uncertainty. There's questions. Will I have a job? How's our business going to be impacted? Where am I going to land in all this? That was just the reality of a lot of people's worlds and situations. And so what I was seeing with a lot of the leaders that I was working with is that people needed some extra affirmation, and they needed to know that, hey, I'm not being forgotten here, and I can trust that I'm getting good info, and even if you don't know what the answer is yet, that I can trust that you're watching out for me. Yeah. So I was just seeing leaders an extra need to really intentionally focus on building trust, whether it was conveying that individually or whether that was trying to build that in maybe a little different way in team sessions. And so that we could get practical with how to do that. But that's trust is one starting point I saw a special need for in the beginning of this recent crisis.
Yeah. So since we are talking about kind of leading
Mm-hmm.
teams here. Let's get specific. The thing that resonates most with what you just said, that resonates the most with me, was this issue of, especially at the beginning of this, with so much uncertainty, you know, that led to, and I saw this in many of my, clients, and, both individuals and people in the organizations that we work with, was, with that, that lack of trust, or just dealing with the uncertainty, led to fear, anxiety, worry.
Mm-hmm.
And, in order to address that, communication really needed to be, where I saw it not working. It wasn't consistent, and it wasn't, it wasn't consistent, either in a messaging or in a delivery. So consistent communications, daily.
Yeah, I was going to say,
we're okay, we're not okay, and we're concerned. And then also the same message, or when the message changed, that it was, very direct. So what have you been seeing?
well, I'm just thinking of two opposite examples, maybe a good example and bad example. I remember two leaders I was working with, who, suddenly had their organization's worlds rocked. Everybody's working from home. One of them had a team of about 8 direct reports, and I was talking with them. How are they doing? He said, I think they're doing okay. We really haven't talked much. I said, what do you mean you haven't talked much? He goes, I just haven't heard much from them. And I'm thinking in my head, okay, you're the leader of the team. You kind of need to take some initiative with them. You got to be able to understand how they're doing, where they're at. You don't want to lose them, do you? But I think, given all of us some grace, he was still reeling himself, unfortunately. But I don't think he fully appreciated where people were at. He wasn't reaching out. Compare that to another leader. I said, how's it going with your team? How are they holding up? And he said, well, we're talking a whole lot more frequently. We're having some virtual team happy hours about once a week, where we used to have an every other week meeting, in-person call, or one of the two. Now we're having, weekly, even twice a week Zoom meetings. And the example I was thinking of was a salesperson, a sales leader. He was leading for a pretty large organization, North American sales operations. And he said, I'm just telling people, back to this trust thing, not only building trust with his team, but also being aware of the trust with his clients, especially in a sales organization. He said, don't push your clients to buy anything right now. Just stay in touch, find out how they're doing, let them know you're there. And these people, that's kind of the way we want to go anyway, naturally, in a crisis. But I think they really appreciated the permission that their senior leader gave them, and it built trust all the way around. Yeah. And it rippled out even beyond the organization, and their clients appreciated how they weren't, that they were being understood, appreciated, and that built trust from the clients back.
So let's hear. I want to just see if anyone who's watching us has some thoughts on how trust has been impacted when they've moved to the a virtual environment, what they've done differently to build trust and build those relationships that may have been traditionally been founded and have a foundation by being in person, by seeing each other and talking and engaging, and that no longer is there. I just want to jump back to a comment we just got. Again, Mike Ford, in response to kind of examples around the nimble organizations, he said, I serve as a coach to school leaders across New York State. Stagnant school systems have struggled to reimagine themselves given the pandemic. The more nimble organizations with strong superintendents and school boards have been able to find ways to bring students back to school full time. They were able to let go of school as we know it and see school as it could be. So,
love that comment, Mike. You're it sounds like you're working in a key area that impacts just about all of us. So good for you for the work you're doing, trying to help support leaders in an academic environment to be nimble. And that is definitely not what most people in an academic, most organizations and institutions in an academic environment are known for.
Yeah, for sure. And so I mean, even that school as it could be, I think that's actually a place where we, meaning all of us, not just you and I, Joe, need to be thinking is, work as it could be, leadership as it could be, my organization as it could be, my team as it could be. And so, so how do we build trust in a team that may never be in person again? Never.
Yeah.
And how do we onboard new team members that we may never, have lunch with, in real time? And so that trust piece is going to be really critical, especially if you don't have a history, a relationship history with that person. So let's move to constructive feedback, because first of all, giving constructive feedback is based, the best constructive feedback is going to come with a trusting relationship as the foundation.
Yeah, I find I'm guessing you do too, Julie, that a lot of people really struggle to give effective feedback, whether it's praise or affirmation, or whether it's, quote unquote negative or constructive feedback, giving people improvement suggestions. But I think it's even tougher in a virtual environment. You just don't have as many natural opportunities right after the meeting or right before going into the conversation. You're maybe not able to observe people in action quite as easily or quite as much. So I think it takes a little more intention to give constructive feedback. And yeah, you can't really do it as well as if you don't have a strong relationship to stand on. Sometimes you can't have a great, strong relationship. You need to give feedback, but it sure helps. And the way you do it can hurt or hinder the relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And, that the issue of real time is, the best feedback or feed forward, whatever we want to call it, happens, as close to real time as possible. And because there's not that flexibility of, walk into someone's door after a meeting, I think it's incumbent on managers, leaders to use technology or just pick up the phone and have those conversations, whether it's affirmative messages or constructive messages. And to role model doing that regularly. What are some other strategies, Joe, that you've coached folks on or that you've seen work well?
Well, I'll give you a couple that I try to remember and I've seen work for people. But I also wanted to just encourage people, if you or the people you love, the people you work with and trying to support. I know, Mike, you're a coach. We may have some other consultants and coaches and HR leaders on the phone here. They're trying to help other people improve in giving feedback. I saw some research, and you may have seen this too, that in order for us to really improve and feel good about our work, we need to get something like 4-to-1 or even 5 or 6-to-1 ratio of positive feedback to negative feedback. And unfortunately, most of us most naturally give feedback only when it's something terrible or big, negative, and maybe we'll give some feedback if somebody just hits a home run and does something really well. But there's a whole lot of things in between, a whole lot of data points, a whole lot of opportunities to give feedback in between there. And I think feedback is probably the single biggest lever that a leader has to help develop somebody. And so we need to get more intentional about, especially in light of that 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 6-to-1 ratio, giving positive feedback and specific, like you said, real time, Julie, tailored to the person, and behaviorally oriented. I've heard shifting to how to do it. I've heard one simple model that I think the Center for Creative Leadership uses, I don't know if they came up with this, but I think they did, and SBI, situation, behavior, impact. Talk about the situation yesterday during our team meeting, the behavior when you slammed your fist on the table. In the virtual, yeah, I even heard it virtually because you had your speaker on, your mic on. No, and then talk about the behavior. I noticed that others in the room kind of shut down. I kind of felt hesitant to share anything. So even just something like that, using a little bit of a structure to help yourself give negative feedback, you can flip that around, use it for positive too, and make it more meaningful.
Yeah.
But being intentional about giving feedback and being intentional about how you do it. If it's emotionally charged, if you think it's likely going to be tough to hear, like Julie said, pick up the phone, talk live, get on a Zoom call. If you can't do it in person, you can at least do it live, and that's going to take a little bit of the risk of being misunderstood and misconstrued out of the equation too.
Yeah. Don't send it via email. Let me just free advice. Don't do it via email. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's funny. So I want to comment on it, but we got another comment from Crystal Prince. Thank you, Crystal. She said, I think communicating more frequently has really helped. She completed her higher education online, so it was easy to adapt. So again, and this builds on what you just said, Joe, about, the 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 6-to-1. In the ideal world, yes, that's happening, but in reality, it's not. It's very difficult in general, and it's specifically more difficult in our virtual world. I'll give another example. You talked about kind of the pounding. This was actually not in a work setting, but perfect example. I'm in a book group. It's a virtual book group, and it's a facilitated book group. It's almost like a mini class every month. We look at a book, and it's Zoom based, and there's a facilitator, and someone made a comment, and another person did not like that comment, and she immediately kind of, instead of listening to that comment, it caused some agitation. And then the situation was diffused, and the facilitator did a great job addressing kind of this little bit of conflict. It's hard to believe, but yes, there was conflict in our book group. But the issue that I felt was really something that needed to be addressed is this person that the conflict that started the conflict for the rest of the session, which there was another hour left. I was looking at her visually because I like to look at people when they're, and you could tell she was not happy. And so to me, it affected the whole tone of that meeting the rest of the time, at least for me, because I was like, okay, yeah, she said she was over this, but she did not participate fully after that. She did not seem happy. I mean, we were talking about a book, this is what we look forward to every month. And so the challenge there was this person, her affect, her visual was having an effect. If it was affecting me, I believe it was affecting other people on the call. So that if that was a team meeting or a work meeting and I was the manager, I would, as soon as I was finished that meeting, I would pick up the phone and want to have a conversation with that person and say, hey, I understand you were emotionally upset, and that interaction wasn't good for you, and it was obvious you were upset, and your how you showed up really impacted the rest of the meeting. And then I would do some coaching and want to have a conversation around that. So
that's a great example, Julie, of tricky situation and trying to deal with it as soon afterwards as you can, and helping the person understand how they came across.
Yeah.
And maybe there's an opportunity to seek to understand a little bit more in the midst of that too. What was going on? Sounds like there's something else going on there.
And we actually, I had a conversation with the facilitator afterwards, because she's also a friend of mine, and I coached her a little and gave her some thoughts, and she was going to follow up directly with both parties. They kind of got into this little conflict, and so because it was important to acknowledge both of both the people to kind of keep the culture of the book group intact, because we're going to meet again next month, and we love the book group. So we got a comment from Bill Hyman, which is building on the feedback, and then we'll see where we'll go from that. We are familiar with the phrase, quote unquote, consider the source when receiving feedback. Leaders need to be thoughtful on how best to build a trusting relationship in order for feedback to be heard, which I think is exactly what Joe was talking about. And Bill, thank you for reiterating that importance is not all feedback you get is going to be something you have to do something with. And so
Right.
When it's coming from your boss and or a client, it's going to be, you may respond to it differently than if it's coming from your great aunt in particular. So I want to make sure, I want to reintroduce the conversation, and I want to get to accountability, because we're going to talk about accountability and clear commitments, and I want to make sure we get to both of those before our time is up. But this is Work Life Leader Live, and we're talking about leading virtually. We're talking about best practices, and I'm here with my colleague Joe Baker, who is an executive coach and partner at People Results. So if you're watching, and we'd love to get your thoughts. We've been talking about how to lead effectively in a virtual environment, and we've touched on trust and constructive feedback. And now let's move to accountability, Joe. Thoughts there? What's important?
Yeah, I think accountability is you can oversimplifying. You can kind of look at it as the flip side of extending, grace and trust and support. So just taking this recent example where we were suddenly thrust in a mainly working from home world, I think there was an extra need to show grace, empathy, patience, and just cut people some slack and ourselves some slack. And that's still needed to some extent. And at the same time, we still need to get stuff done, and we need to stay in business. And sometimes we need, a kick in the rear, or at least an affirming arm around the shoulder to kind of help you move along the path. And I think it's where accountability comes in. And it's always needed, but I think in a virtual setting, again, there are some nuances. But I think that some of the same principles apply. It's important to be really clear about expectations. It's important to understand if you're leading a team, what kind of accountability is going to work best with your team from a team standpoint, and what kind of accountability is going to work best with your individual team members. You may have somebody that's long-term pro, super productive, doesn't need a whole lot of accountability, just needs to know the goal and the due date, and you're clear on what's expected then, and they're off and running. Yeah. You may have somebody else that they need some more interim milestones and ongoing support, and maybe some periodic reclarification of expectations and opportunity to re-up to make sure that they're clear and committed to what's being expected.
Yeah. So this issue of accountability and the fourth item we were going to talk about, I mean, they're tied together, accountability and clear commitments, where it's really, in your role as a leader, again, regardless of the level of the organization, and even in your role, if you're an individual contributor or a team member, you need to be clear on what you expect of the people around you and what they can expect of you. Mm-hmm. And, so from an individual standpoint, it's, say what you mean and mean what you say, do what you say you're going to do and say what you're going to do. And so, that individual accountability is something, that I think strong leaders, work and build. It doesn't have to be innate, but it's something one can build. But that being able to, and again, they all tie together. To build accountability, there needs to be trust. And so, how are you
Mm-hmm.
as a team member or a manager or a leader building those relationships so you can have that conversation with someone? Hey, I need to see you do this, or what support do you need to make sure this happens? Because your role is really critical to the success of this whatever you're working on.
Julie, I'll share an example, a real positive example I saw where I think this may have been even before the pandemic. This was a team that worked virtually quite a bit already. And the leader of the team was introducing OKRs, objectives and key results, as a way to help his team be really clear on what they were shooting for. And so to help encourage accountability, he had everybody ready to share their OKRs with the rest of the team, and that became a standing part of their team conversation. Everybody would share their screen, or they'd get their section to him, and he would share his screen. So everybody saw everybody else's overall objectives and key results, and people could ask questions and give ideas to each other as they each during the team meeting checked in real briefly on how they were doing against those. So that was it was a non-threatening, constructive, positive, but really clear way to keep expectations in front of people and keep accountability pretty strong. Wow. I mean, there was a need for some individual conversations offline sometimes, but that I thought set a really nice stage for the team and how they worked together and supported each other.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what in coaching we use the term charge neutral. It sounds like it was a safe, not threatening environment where people could understand what was expected of them and what they were committing to. So the more people understood what was going on, then they could support each other, and more information is better, especially during this time when you're not running into people. So that's really cool. I really like that concept.
I also think that there's this like you said, these things have an interplay with each other. Constructive feedback, for example, is a great skill to have as you're trying to, for a leader, not only for a leader, as you're trying to promote and drive accountability in a positive, inspiring sort of way on your team, but even as a peer or as somebody who's working for another leader. If you can give constructive feedback effectively, that is a great tool to drive accountability in all directions. It shouldn't be just on the leader to give accountability.
Right. And to do that, you need to have a culture, and that culture could be a team culture. It could be, a larger, a division culture. It could be an organizational culture, but you need to have a culture where that is seen as, not taboo, where and you need ground rules, right? You need ground rules that say we give feedback to each other, always with the intention of it moving the project forward in a caring and respectful way. Because you might say, it's all about moving the project forward. Hey, what you did really sucked, excuse my French, on the project, and now you should do it this way. That's not a good way to give feedback. But if it's coming from the place of respect, caring for the person, and moving the project forward, or hey, when you did this, I'm concerned it may have done this. Can we talk about this? How it might be more effective next time. And so that is where, if you're having, the individuals, like you said, really critical that people feel comfortable giving that to peers. And it needs to be elevated somehow from a leadership standpoint of what that looks like. Right.
Yeah. The leader ought to set the tone, but shouldn't have full responsibility for being the only one to provide accountability and give feedback like that.
Because then it becomes like parent, right? Then it's like, okay, our boss, mom, or our boss dad. That's totally not, that's not what I don't think that's what people want in the world of work anymore. In maybe certain times where it's like I'm clocking in and I'm working my 8 hours and I have a very specific task. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. and there still might be some environments and, that serves the work, but I think our much more holistic and robust world of work, that's, it's just, it has to be coming from everywhere. So before we're going to be, we're on the downside to moving to wrapping up, but I want to just pull back in the our viewers to see, as we start to wrap up in the next 5 or so minutes, want to see what other questions or comments you have about leading virtually. If there's any best practices that you want to share, either affirming any that Joe and I have talked about, or maybe there's something we haven't mentioned about more effective ways for virtual leadership. We'd love to get your comments. But then, so let's maybe do you want to share, Joe? Maybe I know we had another, which we don't necessarily need to go, but actually the other slide just has some great areas. I'm going to show it, but
sure.
We were talking about successes and failures. But do you want to maybe just give an overview of this slide and maybe what
I'd be glad to. Yeah. So what I did was pull a few key aspects of leading and working in a team that I think have some special nuances in a virtual setting. And Julie teed up. We'd love to hear your comments, about your examples you've seen, either a success or maybe a fail in leading effectively or working, in a team effectively, or not. But I'll give a couple of examples that strike me. One, executive presence is a term that we hear a lot, and I can think of an example of where a new leader came in. She came in. She was working outside the corporate headquarters location, and they were in a pretty much a virtual setting. She's on the phone with her team members, and was the only one that wasn't on video. So people didn't really know her well yet. They were on video. She wasn't. She's the leader. And I just thought, as I observed the conversation, and she had good reason for that specific time. She was concerned that she might get kicked off for internet bandwidth constraints, which is ironic because she was the technology leader of the entire organization. But they were figuring it out as they go. But I just thought it was a miss on her part.
Yeah.
I think that we can, if people can see each other, it's just a little accelerator in building that trust and rapport. And anything we can do on that front, especially if we're in a crank, get results, transaction kind of mode, anything we can do to foster the interpersonal connection is going to help build that trust, help build the quality of the relationship, and accelerate the development of effective relationships. So that was just an example of a miss. So yeah, I mean, not that all calls, to your point earlier, Julie, we need to be sensitive about overloading people with video calls, but be selective, be deliberate. And if there's a need to develop the relationship further, think long and hard about trying to talk live, and especially trying to do it through video if you can't do it in person.
Yeah.
That's one example.
For sure. Great. Well, so let's, as we're about to wrap up, I always like to end with kind of your final thought. Like, we can both share final thoughts. What's the one or two takeaways? Like, what's the elevator pitch on this topic? If someone's thinking about leading virtually and kind of best practices, what are the one or two things that you think should be part of the mix?
Well, this first comment is going to be maybe a reminder to all of us anyway, virtual or not, but effective leadership is about paying attention to results and relationships. And I think in a virtual setting, it requires a little bit more intention about the relationship piece of this. And so, because maybe it's not as natural to run into people in the hall, or maybe we're a little bit at a deficit our social needs being met at the moment anyway. Whatever the case, we're onboarding in a new organization and haven't met people, don't know them. So anything we can do a little bit more intentionally to foster those effective relationships is going to be helpful, especially in a virtual setting.
For sure. So I'll affirm that, Joe. I think you're spot on. One of my mantras is, the whole person comes to work, right? So you got to pay attention to the whole person.
Yep.
The person who is leading is human. The person that is being led, but that lead being led, analogy is a little old. Those you collaborate with, in times of crisis, in times of transition, in times of reinvention, the understand what that person needs and try to be that support to help facilitate, the results that you want as the team and that you want for that individual. And I think that's really what it's all about. So.
And Julie, I'll throw one more thing on there. This is a real practical, tactical thing, but I think just practically realizing how you're coming across in the virtual environment is really important. Just like this technology leader that I mentioned, I don't think that she thought about the miss or the opportunity that she passed up by not showing her face on the video. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a video session with a senior leader who's they've been looking away because their monitor is over here, but their camera is over here, and it's one of those basic things. Hopefully, most of us have kind of figured out by now. But how's the lighting? Can people see you? Are you scaring people away by being too close? Are you too far back? It's okay if your dog runs across the back, or we're cutting each other slack, especially in this current environment. If you've got your teenager walking across the back, I can't tell you how many stories I've seen of crazy things. I'm sure we all have. So we cut each other some slack, but at the same time, we need to be intentional, especially I think in a virtual setting, about how we come across and what impression we want to leave people with, and how well we're able to connect with them and influence, collaborate, whatever else we need to do as leaders.
Right. Excellent. Well, that's a beautiful way to wrap up this topic, Joe. So, Joe, if people want to talk to you, how can they reach you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Oh boy, they can email me, jbaker@people-results.com. Maybe I should put this in the chat.
I will put in the chat later.
There you go.
I will put in. So Joe's written a couple great articles. So I will put those articles in there, which I think will lead to your contact information. So
perfect. Thanks, Julie.
And any comments you have for Joe, I'm on LinkedIn. He'll be reading the comments, and I can get them to him also. So, well, it was a pleasure, Joe, as always, to talk to you. And
likewise, Julie. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just tell, for those who are watching, what we have coming up. We have some, as I've told people over and over again, if I didn't have to earn money, I would do this full time, because I love talking to smart people about interesting topics. But I'm really excited because we have some really good conversations coming up, building on today. We have some topics of strengths-based leadership we're going to be talking about. I have one about self-awareness and anti-racism, tying those together. And we're going to have another episode of the Work Life Leader book group coming up next month. One of my favorite books. I'm a bit evangelical about this book. We're going to be talking about the 100-Year Life. This is a book I give to all my clients. I've actually probably bought 200 copies of this book at least.
And Julie, you've given it to me. Great one. Thank you.
All my coaches, any coach who works with me gets it. My friends start to get it. I'm trying to get my 18-year-old to read it, but I think he's still not there yet. But we're going to be talking about this next month. So please stay in touch. We post all the upcoming events on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you all for watching. Joe, once again, thanks for sharing your expertise and insight. It's extremely valuable and helpful. So take care, everyone. We'll see you next time.